Discover how you can green your life by building a knowledge base of current sustainable and eco-savvy trends. This series will delve into hot topics, current standards and practices, ways to design better spaces, and specify materials that benefit not only us as consumers, but the world as a whole. Members of CaraGreen, as sustainable materials distributors, and other industry leaders weigh in throughout the series. This is Build Green, Live Green.
Hi, this is Jessica with Build Green, Live Green. Today we have Stacy Glass, who is the former president of CaraGreen and was the one who hired me. So thanks for that.
Thank you for that.
Can you tell us kind of about your journey from CaraGreen to where you are now with ChemForward, which is, what we're going to kind of dig into today on the podcast?
I'd be happy to. So as you know, when we started CaraGreen together, we aspired to that cradle-to-cradle design philosophy, where there's safe materials that can be perpetually cycled, that are manufactured in ways that respect humans and the environment. We aspired to, way back in what was that, 2007, 2008, to that multi-attribute approach to a sustainable product. So the chemicals, the cyclability, energy, water, and social. Right. And what we learned, you and I, from working with companies and trying to bring innovative products to market. And then in my next role after that with the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, working with really well-intentioned companies there, the biggest barrier to companies pursuing that design philosophy is that chemical hazard assessment piece. It was the number one cost, the most time consuming, and the thing that sent a really well-intentioned company back to the drawing board, maybe never to return to the program because they had a little something in their product that was going to keep them from cradle to cradle certification. And they didn't know what substitute to use. So we came to the conclusion, just to simply grow the cradle to cradle philosophy, that we needed a shared database of this toxicology information. And we naively, while I was at the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute, just thought, well, this is just a data organization and scaling issue. We can do this. And as we started to explore it, we realized when we solve this, we'll be solving a problem for all of industry. And so we spun out of the Cradle to Cradle Products Innovation Institute. We created ChemForward, and ChemForward is aspiring. Well, we're doing it now. We aspired to, and now we've done it, created a shared repository of chemical hazard assessments with a focus on safer alternatives.
So, from the CaraGreen perspective, we're talking about building materials, and building materials you interact with a little bit differently than maybe some more consumer-oriented materials. So ChemForward, you guys don't just focus on building materials. In fact, the industries that you're kind of initially assessing or working with are more consumer focused, right?
Yes, the three sectors that we are scaling data sets for are beauty and personal care, consumer electronics, and packaging. And some of that was based on an analysis of where's the biggest need, what's our best market opportunity here. But some of it was also just a coalition of the willing, who was willing to take this leap forward with us. And so those sectors had real leadership. The built environment, I think, is still very ripe for this kind of initiative because they've put the foundation in place with the HPD, the Health Product Declaration. They have disclosure. But how do then we get beyond just disclosing and move towards, this is actually a better product? There we need a common measuring stick.
So when you and I first started CaraGreen, LEED had just come out, the LEED building standard, and it's gone through several revamps. The most recent being one that I think aligns kind of with what you just said, where they've gone from just valuing disclosure, telling me what's in it, to creating these paths for optimization, which make it better. And that's something you and I have always kind of had in our back pocket, is this idea of make it better. But, LEED is now allowing for that. And I think what you're doing is at a very deep, like literal building block level, giving people a way to make it better. Can you kind of talk about what ChemForward's product is? It's not just a mission, right? It's not a service, but how would you classify it? A database, a tool, describe it.
I would say we're an enabler. And I'll tie this. I haven't reviewed the latest lead credits on the material section, but I'm guessing that some certifications are a way that you can prove that you're optimized in those credits. Well, to get those certifications, it's costly, it takes time, this kind of thing. So we are an enabler actually for certifications because we are that chemical hazard data set that could, in theory, be used towards certification. You can come in and use our database right now and pre-screen for cradle to cradle certification. You can see how close your ingredients are to meeting that certification, how it might fare, or where the data gaps are. There's no question we don't have all the data yet, that you could at least see where the hotspots might be and where the data gaps might be, and get an early indicator of how optimized you are.
So a database, when I picture a database, I just picture, a bunch of data sitting online in the cloud, and there's got to be some sort of interface to it, some sort of is it a tool that you log into and you type in your ingredients and you get a report card?
I'll tell you, we first started with, we were just so proud. We were just posting safer alternatives, and you could come in and subscribe to see this list of safer plasticizers or alternatives to cyclic silicones in beauty and personal care. And our users were like, okay, this is great. We've been waiting for safer alternatives for a long time, but this isn't how I do my work. I need to see this chemical in relation to the incumbent that I'm trying to move away from. What does the incumbent look like? How bad is that? What are these safer alternatives? Why isn't this other thing I'm thinking of present? And so our version 2 platform, which we just launched in January of this year, is just what you described. You come in, you can search for any chemical by name, CAS number, INCI name in beauty and personal care, and a profile of that chemical. What is known or not known about that chemical will come up. Now, we started out too with just one platform, but we quickly realized that for each of the verticals that we're serving, they have very different needs. And so now we've customized platform, same data supplying it, but the interface for each sector is slightly different. So what you'll see on the left-hand navigation is functions. So the functions in beauty and personal care, the functions for that we're focused on.
What's an example?
In electronics, we're really focused on safer flame retardants, safer plasticizers, safer solvents. And so you'll go to function, you'll pick that, you can see the safer alternatives, or you can say, I need a flame retardant that's compatible with this polymer, and you can further narrow your search by that.
And is your database, all this information about these chemicals, is it pulled from other sources and pooled? Is it data that you've gone out and kind of commissioned yourself? And where are you, asking that and kind of connecting it to where are you getting the resources to for these reports if in fact you're having to go out and pay for these expensive reports?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of everything you just described. We have brought in the full Pharos data set. And if your listeners are familiar with the Pharos data set, it's a very extensive list of lists, probably the most extensive. And it's what feeds the HPD builder tool. So we're all using that same data set list of lists. And what that is best for is known bads. And letting you know okay, this is on some list, this is problematic, I need to be aware of that. And there's no need for us to spend thousands of dollars looking at a chemical that we know is a known bad. And so we are just happy to take that authoritative information, that list information, and provide that to the users and assign that an F in our system. We have A, B, C, F, and question mark, meaning we don't have enough information to make a decision about this chemical. We also consolidate chemical hazard assessments. Now, these are the toxic, when I say chemical hazard assessments or a CHA, these are the full toxicology reports on a single chemical. And they tend to be 60, 70 pages long. They look at 24 human and environmental endpoints. We have to look at both of those to have a balanced equation. And the reason that we do that as we seek safer alternatives is that, as my co-founder, Dr. Lauren Hine, often says, toxic is easy, safe is hard. To decide that something is toxic, you might just have to look at one or two endpoints. Is it a sensitizer? Shouldn't use it in beauty and personal care. Should be on the list. Is it a carcinogen? We shouldn't use that anywhere. So it's easy to, we're like, okay, that's bad. We don't have to go any further. But to say that something is good, it needs to clear all of those human and all of those environmental endpoints for us to say this is a safer alternative. And so we are not only bringing in all that Pharos data, we're consolidating existing chemical hazard assessments that are publicly available in the world, and then we are procuring new chemical hazard assessments with our partners. And so our co-design partners, like in electronics, it include Google, Apple, HP, Intel, and Amazon. They do their chemical hazard assessment work, many of them, in our system. So if actually, we're reviewing it today. Google just sponsored 20 safer flame retardant assessments. Some of those didn't end up being safer. And now together as a group, we'll look at those and say, what can we learn from this data set? And now those other 4 companies don't have to do that work. It exists. We can share it. Another company's working on solvents. We're doing about 24 solvents, and we shouldn't have to redo that work for anybody else. So this is how a cost sharing, benefit sharing model is going to get us to safer chemistry faster.
Yeah. So you're talking about some big names. And I think that's what's important for our listeners to understand is that this is not something that's a kind of a flash in the pan. This is not going away. This is becoming the central repository where everything is going to get screened against. And it's being driven by some of these big names. So, when you're thinking about your products and your materials, this is, eventually these two markets are going to intersect. I did want to back up a little bit because there's a phrase that you use that I always find it really interesting. And I think it's kind of the underpinnings of this whole conversation, and it's regrettable substitution. So we figured out something was bad, and then we said, okay, you have to eliminate this from, I can't buy a plastic bottle at Target that doesn't say BPA free on it. And so you're seeing these large companies kind of enforce these sustainability requirements. But just because something's BPA free, I could choose an alternative to BPA that's considered a regrettable substitution. And it's very literal in what it means. It means you chose something else that might have been equally close to or even worse than what was there in the first place. We just don't know about it yet.
That's exactly right. And that's why we could do a lot with lists, and the listeners probably have lists from their customers. We don't want any of this in your product. We don't want any of that in your product. But lists are a great place to start because they rapidly move us away from known chemicals of concern. But they're a terrible place to stop in that they lead to regrettable substitutions. And you gave one of the most public examples just there, right, worldwide legislation to eliminate BPA, especially in our plastic water bottles, our kids' sippy cups, things like that, things that are very bioavailable. And soon, every retailer had BPA free all over their shelves. It only took about 3 years before we realized, well, what was that replacement? It was BPS. And now that we've done the profile on that, it's just as bad or worse. If we had had the ChemForward data set at that time, we would have known that that was a regrettable substitution, and we would have sought another solution. And retailers are very sensitive to this because not only the cost to their supply chain, right, of turning everything over, but then the loss of confidence from the consumer. What? You gave me BPA free stuff and it was just as bad? That breaks that bond between the retailer and their customer. So there's a big risk for them in regrettable substitutions.
Yeah, and I think too, the path forward here, for what you're doing, like I said, it will eventually intersect with building materials. And as we wrap up here, I'd like you to kind of talk about what conversations you're having with building materials. But for our listeners, I think it's important to know that beauty and cosmetics, this is stuff we're putting directly on our bodies. So obviously that's kind of like the first thing that is really important to address. And there's a lot of the beauty companies now are talking about safe. So you are seeing that shift in terminology. Clean beauty, and then the shift towards, as you said, safe. And then I also think apparel is another one where you're starting to see a lot of attention, and you probably know some other industries too. I find it interesting that Google is involved because I feel like, to me, they're still like this cloud-based, server-based organization, but to see them pushing this too, it just kind of shows you how integrated that the whole supply chain is getting.
I'll say not only involved, they were the first ones to say yes to this back in 2016. And it came from the real estate and workforce services group. Many of your listeners, I'm sure, have tried to sell into the Google spec because they at one point, I don't know if it's still true, they were one of the biggest, fastest builders in the world globally. Putting up buildings and office space. And they wanted to have the healthiest building materials. And they realized right away that the tools didn't exist in the world for them to get to safer. They could be free of, but they wanted to get to safer. And over time, we've then started working with their devices group. They've joined, that's part of our electronics group. And their food services group, they have these amazing cafeterias on their campuses and great food service and all the issues around packaging and single-use materials. And so they're in it from a multi-product perspective.
And it's interesting that you're kind of sort of intimating that it started on the built environment side. So can you just kind of, as we wrap up here, just connect it back to what is ChemForward's path forward with building materials? And just quickly for our listeners, ChemForward is ChemForward.org, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. Well, I'm happy to say I can't wait until we are more actively, directly addressing the built environment, because I spent over a decade there doing good work with Green and with other companies from cradle to cradle. Loved it. Missing Green Build, which I think is going on as we speak, where we would always reconnect. We are a project of the Healthy Building Network. They act as our umbrella 501c3, and we did that as we spun out of Cradle to Cradle because we were so mission aligned in our safer chemistry objectives. And they've provided a great home for us, incubator for us to grow. And that allows us also to keep a finger on the pulse of what are the topics and where is this going. And so I expect that in the coming, hopefully 12 or 24 months, you'll see us start to reconnect with the HPD and start to try to explore offering not just list screening, through the HPD, but offering screenings for safer chemistry and starting to identify data gaps where if we filled one chemical data gap, we could improve thousands of HPDs. We aspire to do that kind of data analysis with them and start to move that so that producers who are actually making better stuff have a faster pathway to say, not only have I disclosed here on the HPD, but I can show you that I'm verified safer. That would be the end goal.
Yeah. And that's kind of utopian for us too, because, we work with our manufacturers and we often work with the small or medium guys that are just doing better and they don't have a platform to communicate that. And we try to give them a voice, but to be able to kind of work hand in hand with, what they're already doing and get them to make, better products, as we've always kind of aspired to, is sort of the direction that we want to go to. So I'm excited that we're going to intersect here in the near future. Again, close the loop.
Exactly. We'll get circular.
All right. Well, thank you, Stacy, for being our guest. This is Jessica with Build Green, Live Green.